If someone told me that grief could lead to the most forbidden connection of my life, I'd have laughed in their face. But here I was standing in the garden, my hands trembling, as his gaze locked with mine. The silence between us wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. I knew crossing this line could destroy everything, but I couldn't stop myself from wanting more. For 30 years, my life was a patchwork of predictable routines, stitched together by obligation rather than love. My husband, Jerry, was a man of few words and fewer affections. Though I once believed in the fairy tale of happily ever after, reality crept in, slowly dimming the spark I once imagined we shared. 2 summers ago, everything changed. Jerry passed away, leaving me with a quiet home and a louder silence in my heart. But grief wasn't the only weight I carried, it was relief, too. I hadn't been happy for years, and though the guilt of admitting that stung, it was the truth. Without him, I could finally breathe, but that freedom came with an emptiness I didn't know how to fill. I threw myself into small joys, tending my garden, knitting blankets that no one needed. My world became smaller, safer, as though shrinking it could protect me from further heartbreak. And it worked, for a while. That is, until Kevin arrived. Kevin was Jerry's grandson from his first marriage, a distant connection I barely knew. He was 25, with striking green eyes that seemed far older than his years. I hadn't seen him since he was a boy, but the man who arrived that summer was confident, brooding, and magnetic in a way I couldn't quite place. At first, his visit felt like a disruption to my quiet life. He spent his days exploring the woods, reading thick novels on the porch, and occasionally offering polite conversation over dinner. Yet, there was something about him that intrigued me, the way his gaze lingered, the sadness behind his smiles. I could see he was searching for something, though I didn't know what. Slowly, Kevin began to chip away at the walls I'd built around myself. It started with small gestures, helping me in the garden, staying to chat a little longer after meals. Then came the deeper conversations, his dreams, his struggles, his feeling of being untethered in the world. In his words, I saw my own reflection, a soul searching for meaning in the wake of loss. By the time I realized how close we'd grown, it was already too late. Something unspoken had taken root between us, something that neither of us dared to name. At first, I convinced myself that the tension I felt was all in my head. Kevin was young, grieving in his own way, and perhaps that's why he seemed so drawn to me. But it was the small moments that began to unravel my carefully constructed reasoning, the way his gaze lingered a second too long, the way his hand would brush against mine when passing a dish at dinner. I started noticing his behavior more closely. He became unusually attentive, his presence a quiet shadow in my day-to-day life. If I was in the garden, Kevin was there, his strong hands turning the soil beside mine. If I was curled up with a book on the porch, he would emerge from the house, coffee in hand, asking me about my thoughts. His questions weren't superficial, they dug deep, forcing me to confront emotions I had long buried. And then there were the evenings. Our conversations stretched longer, often well past midnight. I would find myself talking about things I hadn't shared with anyone, about Jerry, my regrets, my dreams as a younger woman that never came to pass. Kevin listened intently, his green eyes holding mine in a way that made me feel exposed yet safe. But there were moments I couldn't ignore. Like the time I caught him watching me from the kitchen doorway as I made tea. He didn't look away, and neither did I. The air between us was thick, charged with something neither of us dared acknowledge. One evening, after another one of our long conversations, he reached over and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a jolt through me. I quickly looked away, muttering something about being tired and retreating to my bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to convince myself that it was innocent, that I was imagining the tension. But then came the night I found him sitting in the living room, staring at a photo of Jerry. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of longing and pain. When I entered, he quickly set the photo down and smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You miss him, don't you?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied, though the truth was far more complicated. "You're not alone, you know," he said, his voice low, steady. The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Was it comfort he was offering, or something more? From that moment, I began to feel his presence everywhere, even when he wasn't there. His scent lingered on the chair he often used, his laugh echoed in my mind long after the sound had faded. I started avoiding him, staying in my room longer, finding excuses to busy myself with chores. But no matter how much distance I tried to create, the pull between us grew stronger. One afternoon, as I was organizing old books in the attic, Kevin appeared at the doorway. "Do you need help?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes intense. I hesitated before nodding, unable to find my voice. As we worked side by side, the closeness became unbearable. The way his arm brushed against mine, the way he glanced at me when he thought I wasn't looking, it was all too much. My breath hitched when he placed a hand on my shoulder, lingering just a moment too long. Something was happening between us, something I couldn't explain but could no longer deny. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came to the surface. It happened gradually, like the tide creeping up on the shore. At first, I told myself it was just kindness, that Kevin was simply trying to fill the void Jerry had left behind. But the moments between us began to carry an unmistakable weight, a tension that neither of us acknowledged yet both seemed to feel. One evening, after a day spent working in the garden, Kevin suggested we sit on the porch to watch the sunset. The air was warm, the horizon painted in fiery hues of red and orange. As we sat side by side, the silence between us felt different, heavy, charged. His hand rested on the armrest, mere inches from mine. I could feel the warmth radiating from his skin, and before I knew it, my fingers were brushing against his. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a shiver through me. I quickly pulled my hand back, pretending to adjust the hem of my dress, but Kevin's gaze was fixed on me. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm fine," I replied, my voice trembling slightly. I wasn't fine. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between what was right and the overwhelming pull of something forbidden. The next few days passed in a blur. Kevin seemed to sense my hesitation, yet he didn't pull away. Instead, he grew bolder, finding reasons to be close to me. Whether it was helping with chores, sitting beside me during meals, or brushing against me in the narrow hallways of the house, his presence was constant, undeniable. One night, as I was cleaning up after dinner, Kevin entered the kitchen. I didn't hear him at first, too lost in my thoughts. When I turned around, he was standing there, watching me. His green eyes held a depth that made my breath catch. "You've been avoiding me," he said, stepping closer. "I don't know what you mean," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "You do," he said, his voice steady, yet filled with something unspoken. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Tell me you don't feel it too." I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there, frozen, as he closed the gap between us. His hand lingered on my cheek, his touch both tender and electrifying. When his lips met mine, it was as if the world around us disappeared. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, but quickly deepened, igniting something within me I hadn't felt in years. I pulled back, breathless, my heart racing. "This isn't right," I said, my voice trembling. But even as I spoke the words, I knew I didn't mean them. Kevin stepped back, his expression unreadable. "I know," he said quietly, "but it doesn't feel wrong." The days that followed were a whirlwind of stolen glances and quiet moments that carried 1,000 unspoken words. One evening, as we sorted through old photos in the attic, Kevin reached for my hand. This time, I didn't pull away. Instead, I let myself lean into him, savoring the warmth of his touch. "I don't know what we're doing," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "Neither do I," he replied, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of my hand. "But I know I don't want it to stop." As the summer wore on, the boundaries between us blurred further. A lingering touch here, a whispered confession there. Each moment felt like a step closer to something we couldn't take back. I found myself craving his presence, his touch, the way he made me feel alive again. One night, as the rain poured outside, we sat by the fireplace, the soft glow of the flames casting flickering shadows across the room. Kevin reached for my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. "I don't want to lose this," he said, his voice raw with emotion. I looked at him, tears brimming in my eyes. Neither do I whispered. When he kissed me again, it was different. There was no hesitation, no fear, just the overwhelming pull of two souls who had found solace in each other. That night, we crossed a line we could never uncross, but in that moment, it didn't matter. The weight of the world faded, leaving only the two of us, lost in each other. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when everything unraveled. The sky was overcast, casting a muted light over the house. Kevin had gone for a walk in the woods, and I was folding laundry in the living room, lost in my thoughts. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, stolen moments, whispered confessions, and the weight of a secret too heavy to carry. I knew we were living on borrowed time, but I didn't expect the reckoning to come so soon. The knock at the door startled me. When I opened it, I was surprised to see my neighbor, Diane, standing on the porch. She was holding a casserole dish, her expression unreadable. "Just thought I'd stop by," she said, her tone overly casual. "I haven't seen much of you lately." I invited her in, trying to mask my unease. We made small talk, but Diane's eyes kept wandering, taking in the room as if she were searching for something. When Kevin walked in moments later, her expression shifted. The silence that followed was deafening. "Oh," she said, her eyes darting between us. "I didn't realize you had company." Kevin greeted her politely, but his posture stiffened, and I could feel the tension radiating from him. Diane didn't stay long, but her knowing glances and the way her lips pursed as she left me with a sinking feeling in my stomach. She had seen something, felt something, and I knew it wouldn't be long before the whispers started. That evening, Kevin and I sat in the kitchen, the tension between us palpable. "She knows," I said quietly, staring down at my cup of tea. Kevin reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "It doesn't matter," he said firmly, his eyes locking with mine. "What we have, it's real." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of what we were doing, the betrayal of trust, the breaking of unspoken societal rules, pressed down on me like a heavy fog. The world outside felt closer than ever, threatening to shatter the fragile bubble we had created. And then came the moment I had been dreading. Later that week, as I was returning from the market, I found Jerry's old friend, Thomas, standing on my porch. He was holding an envelope, his face grim. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. He handed me the envelope without another word. Inside were photographs, Kevin and me, sitting together on the porch, his hand brushing against mine. Another of us in the garden, laughing. And then, one that made my blood run cold, a picture of us through the kitchen window, our faces close, Kevin's hand on my cheek. My mind raced. Who had taken these? How had they known? Thomas watched me, his expression a mixture of pity and disappointment. "People are talking," he said finally. "You need to be careful. For your sake. For his." When Kevin came home that evening, I showed him the photos. His jaw tightened as he flipped through them, his green eyes darkening with anger. "This is our business," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "No one else's." "But it's not just ours anymore," I said, my voice cracking. "Someone knows, Kevin. And they're watching." For the first time since this began, I felt the weight of our choices crushing down on me. The secrecy, the stolen moments, it had all seemed intoxicating, even beautiful. But now, it felt fragile, like glass on the verge of shattering. That night, we argued for the first time. Kevin wanted to confront whoever was behind the photos, while I begged him to let it go. "We can't keep pretending this is normal," I said, tears streaming down my face. "It's not normal. It's not right." Kevin stepped closer, his hands gripping my shoulders. "What we have is real," he said fiercely. "Don't let them take that away from us." But the cracks were already forming. The guilt I had managed to suppress came flooding back, along with the realization of how much we stood to lose. Our secret had bound us together, but now, it threatened to tear us apart. The final blow came a few days later. I was in the garden when Diane appeared at the gate, her expression somber. "You need to know something," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "People are saying things. About you and Kevin. It's not safe for him to stay here." Her words were a dagger to my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. Gossip spreads fast in a small town, she said. You need to put a stop to this before it gets worse. That evening, Kevin and I sat on the porch, the weight of Diane's warning hanging over us. Maybe she's right, I said, my voice barely audible. Maybe it's time for you to leave. Kevin's head snapped up, his expression one of disbelief. You don't mean that, he said. I don't want to lose you, I said, tears streaming down my face. But I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. He reached for my hand, his grip firm. I'll leave if you want me to, he said. But I'll never stop loving you. The words broke something in me. I pulled him into my arms, clinging to him as though letting go would mean losing him forever. The truth was, we had already crossed too many lines, broken too many rules. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was him. Kevin left the next morning. He didn't say goodbye, not really. I woke to the sound of the car engine fading down the driveway, and when I ran to the window, all I saw was the dust rising behind him. He had left a note on the kitchen table, scrawled in his unmistakable handwriting. I love you. I always will. But I can't stay and keep hurting you. This isn't goodbye, it's just, for now. I stared at the words for what felt like hours, my tears blurring the ink. The house, once filled with the quiet hum of our connection, now felt cavernous and empty. Every corner seemed to carry his presence, the chair where he'd sit with his coffee, the garden where we had worked side by side, the attic where we had shared our first unspoken confession. He was everywhere, and yet he was gone. The whispers in town grew louder in his absence. Diane's words had been a warning, but they hadn't prepared me for the full force of the judgment that followed. Neighbors who once greeted me warmly now avoided my gaze. At the market, I could feel the stares, the hurried whispers as I walked past. She's too old for that kind of drama, I overheard one woman say. Disgusting, another muttered. What would her husband think? Each word cut deeper than the last. Shame, guilt, and heartbreak intertwined, forming a constant weight in my chest. I stopped going out, retreating into the safety of my home. But even there, I couldn't escape the memories. Every object, every room, seemed to hold a piece of him, a reminder of what we'd shared and the line we'd crossed. I tried to move on. I threw myself into my garden, my knitting, anything to fill the void he had left behind. But nothing worked. At night, I would sit by the fireplace, staring into the flames, replaying every moment we'd spent together. I questioned everything, how it had started, why I hadn't stopped it, and whether I had ruined not just my life but his. For Kevin, the consequences were different. Diane told me he had moved to another town, taking a job at a local library. He had always loved books, and the thought of him surrounded by the stories he cherished brought a bittersweet smile to my face. But she also told me something else. Rumors followed him, too. Whispers about why he had left, about what had happened here. I hated myself for dragging him into this, for making him carry the burden of our choices. Months passed, and the pain didn't lessen, but it changed. It became a quiet ache, a constant companion. I started to find moments of clarity, brief flashes of understanding in the storm of emotions. What Kevin and I had shared wasn't just a mistake, it was a collision of two broken souls, searching for solace in each other. But solace wasn't enough to shield us from the world outside, from the consequences of what we had done. One evening, I found myself sitting in the attic, surrounded by boxes of old photographs and keepsakes. I came across a picture of Jerry, taken on our wedding day. He was smiling, his eyes full of hope. I stared at the photo, a wave of guilt washing over me. He hadn't been a perfect husband, but he had been mine. I wondered what he would think of me now, of the choices I had made. But then I thought of Kevin, his laughter, his touch, the way he made me feel alive again. I couldn't bring myself to regret the time we had shared, no matter how wrong it had been. For the first time in years, I had felt seen, understood, loved. That was a truth I couldn't deny, even as I grappled with the fallout. By the time winter came, the whispers in town had started to die down. People moved on, finding new scandals to occupy their time. But I knew the scars of that summer would remain, etched into my soul like a secret I could never share. I carried the weight of it quietly, finding peace where I could, in the garden, in the soft hum of a rainy afternoon, in the memories of a love that had been both beautiful and impossible. Kevin's note remained on the kitchen table, tucked beneath a vase of fresh flowers. I read it often, tracing the words with my fingertips, wondering if he would ever return. A part of me hoped he wouldn't, not because I didn't love him, but because I wanted him to have a life free from the shadows of what we had done. But another part of me, the part that had dared to dream, to hope, held on to the possibility that maybe, someday, when the world wasn't watching, we could find our way back to each other. Winter melted into spring, and with it came the first hints of renewal. My garden, neglected through the colder months, began to bloom again. The bright yellows and deep purples of the flowers seemed to whisper of second chances, even as the weight of the past lingered in the corners of my heart. Life moved forward, slowly and unevenly. The whispers in town had faded, but the memories remained vivid, etched into my mind like ink on paper. Kevin's note was still there, tucked beneath the vase on my kitchen table. Every time I passed it, I felt a mix of emotions, love, regret, and a strange, quiet hope that refused to disappear. I often found myself reflecting on what had happened. Was it a mistake? Perhaps. But it was also a moment in my life that reminded me what it meant to feel alive, to feel deeply. Kevin had been a mirror, reflecting parts of myself I thought had long since disappeared: courage, vulnerability, and the capacity to love again. One afternoon, I sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sun dip low in the sky. The warmth of the cup in my hands was comforting, steady, a reminder of the small joys I could still hold on to. In that quiet moment, I allowed myself to forgive. Not just Kevin, not just the people who had judged us, but myself. I forgave myself for the choices I made, for the paths I took, and for the ones I didn't. The love Kevin and I shared was flawed, complicated, and unconventional, but it was also real. It taught me something I had forgotten, that love, in any form, is not about perfection. It's about connection. It's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, in a world that so often looks away. I began to let go not of the memories, but of the guilt that had wrapped itself around me like a second skin. Jerry's photograph, once a source of pain, became a reminder of the woman I used to be and how far I had come. I no longer saw his smile as a ghost haunting my choices, but as a reminder to live a life filled with meaning, however messy it might be. Months later, as summer returned, I received a letter. My heart raced as I opened it, the familiar handwriting on the envelope stirring emotions I thought I had buried. It was from Kevin. I hope this letter finds you well. I've thought about you every day. Life here is quiet, simple, but it's not the same without you. I don't know if I'm strong enough to come back, but I wanted you to know that I still carry you with me, in every moment, in every breath. Thank you for showing me what it means to truly live. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words. They were a reminder that, no matter where life took us, the connection we shared would always be a part of me. It wasn't about whether we would meet again or whether we could ever have a life together. It was about what we had given each other, the courage to face the world, to break free from the weight of expectations, and to live authentically, even if just for a moment. As I folded the letter and placed it beside his note, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. Life didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Love didn't have to be conventional to be real. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in golden light, I realized something I hadn't before. Even in the wake of heartbreak and loss, there is always the possibility of new beginnings. We may not control the paths we take, but we can choose to carry the lessons forward, letting them shape us into something stronger, something braver. That, I decided, was enough. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced a choice that changed your life forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world and helps us bring more powerful, thought-provoking stories to life. Stay tuned, our next story will leave you speechless.